Long before England bore that name, when the land was fragmented into countless kingdoms and the Roman legions had withdrawn beyond memory, there lived a king whose reign would echo through the ages. But Arthur's story begins not with crowns or conquest, but with a sword embedded in stone and a boy who knew nothing of his destiny. In those days, the realm of Britain struggled under the weight of countless petty kings, each claiming dominion over their small portion of territory. Wars were as common as sunrise, and the common people suffered beneath the ambitions of nobles who cared more for personal glory than the welfare of their subjects. It was into this fractured world that Merlin the wizard cast his greatest enchantment, embedding a magnificent sword deep within an anvil set upon a marble stone. The blade gleamed with an otherworldly light, its steel forged by hands unknown, its hilt adorned with gems that seemed to capture and hold the very essence of starlight. Upon the stone, words appeared in letters of gold, proclaiming that whosoever could draw forth this weapon would be the rightful king of all Britain. Word of this marvel spread across the land like wildfire, drawing knights and nobles from every corner of the realm. They came in their hundreds, these ambitious men, each certain that destiny had marked them for greatness. The strongest warriors strained against the pommel until their faces turned purple with effort. The most noble lords attempted to convince the sword through prayer and righteous intent. Wise men studied the stone's construction, seeking some hidden mechanism that might yield its secret. Yet the blade remained as immovable as the mountains themselves, mocking every attempt to claim it. Years passed, and the sword in the stone became little more than a curiosity, a reminder of unfulfilled prophecy. The great tournament that had been organized around the marvel continued, drawing knights from across the known world, but few now bothered to attempt the sword's extraction. It was during one such tournament that a young man named Arthur, serving as squire to his foster brother Sir Kay, found himself in desperate need of a weapon. Arthur was not particularly remarkable to look upon, neither the tallest nor the strongest of young men. He possessed instead a quiet confidence and an innate sense of justice that set him apart from his peers. On this fateful morning, he had forgotten to bring Sir Kay's sword to the tournament grounds, and in his panic to remedy this oversight, he spotted the abandoned weapon in the stone. Without fanfare or ceremony, without even understanding the significance of his action, Arthur grasped the sword's hilt and drew it forth as easily as one might pluck a flower from soft earth. The blade sang as it emerged, its voice carrying across the tournament field and bringing every conversation to an abrupt halt. In that moment, the true King of Britain revealed himself not through strength or nobility of birth, but through the simple purity of his intent. The Round Table and the Knights' Fellowship. The establishment of Arthur's court at Camelot marked the beginning of what many consider the golden age of chivalry. The king, guided by Merlin's wisdom and his own innate sense of justice, created something unprecedented in the annals of history, a fellowship of knights bound not by feudal obligation, but by shared ideals of honor, courage, and service to the realm. Central to this fellowship was the Round Table itself, a magnificent piece of craftsmanship that Merlin presented to Arthur upon his marriage to Guinevere. Unlike the rectangular tables common in great halls, where seating arrangements reinforced hierarchy and status, the Round Table had no head, no position of greater honor than any other. When the knights gathered around its polished surface, they sat as equals, united in their dedication to the highest principles of knighthood. The table itself was said to accommodate 150 knights, though only those of proven worth and noble character could claim a seat. Each place was marked with the knight's name, appearing in letters of gold, as if written by an invisible hand. One seat, however, remained perpetually empty, marked only with the word Siege Perilous. This was reserved for the knight pure enough in heart to achieve the quest for the Holy Grail, and any unworthy soul who dared to sit there would be consumed by divine fire. Among the most celebrated of Arthur's knights was Sir Lancelot of the Lake, whose very name became synonymous with martial prowess and courtly virtue. Raised by the Lady of the Lake in her mystical realm beneath the waters, Lancelot emerged into the world as perhaps the finest knight who ever lived. His skill with sword and lance was unmatched, his courtesy impeccable, and his dedication to the ideals of chivalry absolute. Yet within this paragon of knighthood lay the seeds of tragedy, for Lancelot's heart belonged not to any maiden he might honourably court, but to Queen Guinevere herself. Sir Gawain, Arthur's nephew, brought a different energy to the Round Table Fellowship. Known for his strength that waxed and waned with the sun, reaching its peak at noon, Gawain was passionate in all things, quick to anger, but equally quick to forgive. His adventures often involved defending the innocent and championing the cause of justice, though his impetuosity sometimes led him into difficulties that more measured knights might have avoided. Sir Gareth, Gawain's younger brother, represented youth and enthusiasm within the fellowship. His desire to prove himself worthy of a place among the knights led him on numerous quests, each one teaching him valuable lessons about the true meaning of honor. Unlike some knights who sought glory for its own sake, Gareth understood that true nobility lay in service to others and protection of those who could not protect themselves. The tragic figure of Sir Tristan brought music and melancholy to Arthur's court. His mastery of the harp was said to be supernatural, capable of moving even the stones to tears, yet his fate was forever entwined with sorrow. His love for Isolde, wife of King Mark of Cornwall, created a web of loyalty and betrayal that would eventually contribute to the downfall of the Round Table Fellowship. Sir Percival embodied the spiritual dimension of knighthood, his pure heart and unwavering faith, marking him as one of the few knights worthy to undertake the Grail quest. Unlike knights whose prowess was measured primarily in terms of martial skill, Percival's strength lay in his spiritual dedication and his ability to see beyond the material world to the divine truth that underlay all existence. Of all the adventures undertaken by the Knights of the Round Table, none captured the imagination or tested the souls of the Fellowship more thoroughly than the quest for the Holy Grail. This sacred vessel, said to be the cup from which Christ drank at the Last Supper, and which later caught his blood at the crucifixion, represented the ultimate spiritual achievement, a goal that transcended earthly concerns and touched the very essence of divine mystery. The quest began with a vision that appeared to the assembled knights during a feast at Camelot. As they sat around the round table, sharing stories and celebrating their brotherhood, a beam of sunlight more brilliant than any they had ever seen pierced the great hall. Within this celestial radiance, the Grail appeared, covered with a cloth of samite, so that none could see its true form, yet its presence filled every man with a sense of spiritual nourishment greater than any earthly food could provide. As quickly as it had appeared, the vision vanished, leaving the knights filled with an overwhelming desire to seek out this sacred vessel and gaze upon it with uncovered eyes. Sir Gawain was the first to speak, rising from his place and swearing a solemn oath to pursue the Grail for a year and a day, never resting until he had either achieved the quest or died in the attempt. One by one, the other knights followed his example, each making the same vow, until the entire fellowship had committed itself to this spiritual journey. King Arthur watched this scene unfold with mixed emotions. While he recognized the nobility of his knight's intention, he also understood that this quest would scatter the Round Table Fellowship to the four winds, possibly forever. His fears proved prophetic, for the quest that began with such hope and determination would ultimately contribute to the downfall of Camelot itself. The knights who embarked upon the Grail quest discovered that this was unlike any adventure they had previously undertaken. Where their earlier quests had tested their martial prowess, their courage in battle, or their adherence to the chivalric code, the Grail quest demanded something far more difficult: the examination and purification of their own souls. Many knights found themselves wandering in spiritual wildernesses, forced to confront their own shortcomings and failures. Sir Lancelot, despite his unparalleled skill as a knight, found himself repeatedly turned away from the Grail's presence. His love for Queen Guinevere, pure though it might be in intent, represented a division of loyalty that prevented him from achieving the single-minded devotion required for the quest's completion. In a series of visions and encounters with hermits and holy men, Lancelot was forced to acknowledge that earthly love, however noble, could become an impediment to divine love. Sir Gawain's quest took him through numerous adventures, but his essentially worldly nature prevented him from progressing beyond a certain point. His strength, so valuable in earthly combats, proved irrelevant to spiritual challenges. His pride, which had served him well in establishing his reputation as a knight, became an obstacle to the humility required for spiritual advancement. It was Sir Galahad, Lancelot's son, born of his union with Elaine of Corbenic through Merlin's enchantment, who proved worthy of the quest's ultimate achievement. Pure in heart from birth, untainted by earthly desires or worldly ambition, Galahad possessed the spiritual perfection necessary to approach the Grail's full mystery. Accompanied by Sir Percival and Sir Bors, he journeyed to the mystical city of Sarras, where the Grail revealed itself in all its glory. The achievement of the Grail quest marked both the spiritual pinnacle of the Round Table Fellowship and the beginning of its earthly decline. With Galahad's assumption into heaven and Percival's decision to remain in Sarras as a hermit, the Fellowship lost some of its most spiritually devoted members. Those knights who returned to Camelot found themselves changed by their experiences, some enlightened and others disillusioned by their failure to achieve the quest's ultimate goal. The fall of Camelot. The seeds of Camelot's destruction lay not in external conquest or natural disaster, but in the very human frailties that even the noblest hearts cannot entirely escape. The love between Lancelot and Guinevere, long kept within the bounds of courtly devotion, eventually grew beyond the ability of either to control. Their affair, when finally revealed, created a wound in the Round Table Fellowship that could never fully heal. The revelation came through the machinations of Sir Mordred, Arthur's illegitimate son, born of the king's unknowing union with his half-sister Morgause. Mordred embodied everything that the Round Table Fellowship opposed, using honor as a mask for ambition, courtesy as a weapon for manipulation, and loyalty as a tool for betrayal. His exposure of the Queen's adultery served not justice but his own desire to seize the throne. Bound by the laws he had established, and the justice he had sworn to uphold, Arthur found himself compelled to condemn his beloved Queen to death, despite the agony this decision caused him. The situation was made more tragic by the fact that Lancelot, in rescuing Guinevere from the stake, inadvertently killed Sir Gareth and Sir Gaheris, two knights who had refused to bear arms against him, and thus stood unprepared for battle. This tragic accident transformed Sir Gawain, previously one of Lancelot's closest friends, into his most implacable enemy. Gawain's demand for vengeance drove Arthur to pursue Lancelot to his lands in France, leaving the kingdom in Mordred's care, a decision that would prove fatal to everything the king had built. Mordred's usurpation of the throne during Arthur's absence provided the final catalyst for the kingdom's destruction. When Arthur returned to reclaim his crown, father and son met on the field of Camlan in a battle that would end the age of Camelot forever. The clash between Arthur and Mordred resulted in mutual destruction, the son mortally wounding the father, even as the father's spear pierced the son's heart. As Arthur lay dying on the battlefield, surrounded by the bodies of the knights who had once sat in fellowship around the Round Table, he commanded Sir Bedivere to return Excalibur to the Lady of the Lake. Twice Bedivere hesitated, reluctant to cast such a magnificent weapon into the waters, but Arthur's insistence finally overcame his squire's reluctance. As the sword sank beneath the surface, a hand clothed in white samite emerged to catch it, brandishing the blade 3 times before disappearing forever beneath the waves. The mortally wounded king was then borne away by a boat carrying 3 queens, Arthur's sister Morgan le Fay among them, to the mystical Isle of Avalon. There, legend says, he lies sleeping still, waiting for the time when Britain's need is greatest, and he shall return to lead his people once more. Thus ended the reign of the once and future king, leaving behind only memories of what was and prophecies of what might yet be again. In the rolling hills of Cornwall, where ancient stone circles mark places of power older than memory, and where the mists that rise from hidden valleys carry whispers of times long past, there once lived a farmer's son named Jack, whose quick wit and fearless heart would make him the most celebrated giant killer in all of English folklore. Jack's story speaks to the eternal truth that courage and intelligence can triumph over brute force, that the small can overcome the mighty through determination and clever strategy, Cornwall in Jack's time was plagued by giants, enormous creatures whose appetites for human flesh and destruction made life miserable for the common folk. These were not the crude ogres of other traditions, but cunning monsters who combined their physical advantages with considerable intelligence, making them doubly dangerous to anyone unfortunate enough to cross their paths. The giant cormorant was perhaps the most troublesome of these creatures. Having made his lair on St. Michael's Mount, an island fortress connected to the mainland only at low tide, from this stronghold he would venture forth to steal cattle, sheep, and anything else that caught his fancy, terrorizing the local population and growing fat on their labors. Jack's first encounter with Cormoran established the pattern for all his subsequent adventures. Rather than attempting to match the giant's strength, which would have been futile, Jack relied upon preparation, patience, and superior knowledge of local conditions. Under cover of darkness, he dug a massive pit between the giant's lair and the mainland, camouflaging it carefully so that it appeared to be solid ground. The next morning, Jack positioned himself where Cormoran could see him and began hurling insults and challenges at the giant, questioning his courage and suggesting that only a coward would hide on an island rather than face a mere human in fair combat. Enraged by these taunts, Cormoran charged across what he believed to be solid ground, only to plunge into Jack's carefully prepared trap. The giant's fall into the pit was only the beginning of his troubles, for Jack had lined the bottom with sharp stakes that prevented Cormoran from climbing out. From the safety of the pit's edge, Jack could dispatch his enormous foe with a pickaxe, while remaining well beyond the reach of the giant's powerful arms. This victory won Jack considerable fame throughout Cornwall, and established his reputation as a giant killer whose methods, while unconventional, were undeniably effective. News of Jack's success soon reached other giants throughout the region, but rather than deterring them from challenging the young hero, it seemed only to inflame their desire for revenge. Each giant who heard the tale became convinced that he would be the one to avenge Cormoran's death and restore the giant's reputation for invincibility. Jack's second major adventure involved the two-headed giant Blunderbore, who captured the hero while he was traveling through the giant's territory. Unlike his encounter with Cormoran, this adventure required Jack to escape from captivity before he could hope to defeat his captor, demonstrating that giant killing required as much skill in improvisation as in planning. Imprisoned in Blunderbore's castle, while the giant prepared an enormous cauldron for cooking his captured prey, Jack managed to fashion a rope from torn bedsheets and lower himself from his tower prison to the courtyard below. Rather than fleeing immediately, however, Jack chose to turn the tables on his captor, using his freedom of movement to prepare an ambush. When Blunderbore returned to collect his prisoner for cooking, he found the cell empty and began searching the castle in a rage that shook the very foundations of the building. Jack, concealed in the shadows of the great hall, waited until the giant passed beneath a heavy beam before cutting the supports and bringing the massive timber crashing down upon Blunderbore's skull. The defeat of a two-headed giant proved even more impressive to the local population than Jack's victory over Cormoran, for Blunderbore had been considered virtually invincible due to his ability to watch for threats from multiple directions simultaneously. Jack's success proved that even the most formidable advantages could be overcome through careful planning and bold execution. As Jack's reputation spread, he began to attract the attention of giants from throughout Britain, each eager to test their strength against the famous giant killer. These encounters provided Jack with opportunities to refine his techniques and develop new strategies for dealing with different types of supernatural foes. The giant Galligantus posed a unique challenge because of his mastery of magic, which allowed him to transform his victims into various animals and keep them trapped in his enchanted castle. This adventure required Jack to develop counter-magical strategies, using enchanted items and protective talismans to shield himself from Galligantus's spells, while maneuvering into position to deliver a killing blow. Jack's acquisition of magical items marked a significant evolution in his character and methods. The Cap of Knowledge allowed him to learn secrets that would otherwise remain hidden, while the Cloak of Invisibility enabled him to approach his foes undetected. 7 League Boots gave him superhuman speed, allowing him to outmaneuver opponents who might otherwise overwhelm him through sheer size and strength. The sword of sharpness ensured that Jack could cut through even the toughest giant hide, while the shoes of swiftness complemented the 7-league boots in providing enhanced mobility during combat. These magical tools transformed Jack from a clever peasant into something approaching a supernatural hero himself, though he never lost the common sense and practical wisdom that had made him successful in the first place. Dick Whittington and his cat Fortune and Friendship. In the great city of London, during the reign of Richard II, when the narrow streets echoed with the cries of merchants and the Thames flowed brown with the commerce of nations, there lived a poor orphan boy whose name would become synonymous with the pursuit of fortune through honest endeavor and loyal friendship. Dick Whittington's story exemplifies the particularly English belief that any person, regardless of birth or circumstances, can rise to greatness through determination, hard work, and a generous heart. Dick arrived in London with nothing but the clothes on his back and a head filled with stories of streets paved with gold, tales that had drawn countless country folk to the great city in search of fortune. The reality of London life proved far harsher than these stories suggested, with overcrowded tenements, brutal working conditions, and fierce competition for even the most menial employment. Young Dick found work as a scullery boy in the household of merchant Hugh Fitzwarren, a position that provided basic food and shelter but little else. The work was back-breaking, the hours long, and the treatment he received from other servants often cruel. Yet Dick persevered, sustained by an innate optimism and a belief that honest labor would eventually be rewarded. The household of Hugh Fitzwarren was troubled by an infestation of rats and mice that made life miserable for everyone from the master to the lowest servant. These rodents consumed food supplies, damaged valuable goods, and spread disease throughout the building. Various attempts to control the vermin population had met with limited success, creating a constant source of frustration for the entire household. It was Dick's purchase of a cat, bought with his few saved pennies from an old woman in the street, that would change not only his own fortunes, but the fate of everyone in the merchant's house. The cat, a common enough creature with no particular pedigree or distinction, proved to be an extraordinary mouser, whose skill at catching rats and mice exceeded anything the household had previously experienced. Within weeks of the cat's arrival, the rodent population had been decimated, bringing peace and cleanliness to a household that had suffered under the plague of vermin for years. Dick's cat became a local celebrity, with neighbors offering substantial sums for the loan of its services, but the boy refused all such offers, preferring to share his pet's abilities freely with anyone in need. Master Fitzwarren, impressed by Dick's generosity and the practical value of his cat, invited the boy to participate in a trading venture to distant lands. According to the custom of the time, each member of the household was allowed to contribute something to the ship's cargo, with the understanding that any profits from its sale would be shared according to the value of the contribution. Dick's only possession of any value was his beloved cat, and parting with his faithful companion represented a tremendous sacrifice. However, recognizing this as perhaps his only opportunity to improve his circumstances, Dick reluctantly agreed to include the cat in the ship's cargo, trusting that somehow this sacrifice would lead to future benefit. The merchant vessel carrying Dick's cat sailed east through the Mediterranean and beyond, eventually reaching the coast of Barbary, where the local ruler maintained a magnificent palace that suffered from the same sort of rodent infestation that had once plagued Fitzwarren's household. The rats and mice in the palace were so numerous and bold that they swarmed over the dining tables, even during formal banquets, making it impossible for the king and his guests to enjoy their meals in peace. When the English merchants were invited to dine with the king, they witnessed firsthand the severity of the rodent problem. The captain of the vessel, remembering Dick's cat among the cargo, suggested that he might have a solution to the king's difficulty. The cat was brought forth and released among the swarming vermin, immediately demonstrating its extraordinary hunting prowess. The effect was dramatic and immediate. Within minutes, dozens of rats and mice lay dead, while the survivors fled in terror from this supernatural predator, whose like they had never encountered. The king was so impressed by the cat's abilities that he offered to purchase it for a sum that exceeded the value of all the other goods in the ship's cargo combined. The merchant captain, though tempted by the enormous offer, remained true to his obligations to Dick and negotiated a price that would make the young man wealthy beyond his wildest dreams. The king gladly paid the agreed sum, considering it a bargain for a solution to a problem that had plagued his palace for years. Meanwhile, back in London, Dick had grown discouraged by the harsh treatment he continued to receive from other servants and the apparent hopelessness of his situation. On a particularly difficult day, he decided to leave London and seek his fortune elsewhere, despite having no clear idea of where he might go or what he might do. As Dick walked through the early morning streets, carrying his few possessions in a bundle, he paused on Highgate Hill to look back at the city that had promised so much and delivered so little. It was then that he heard the church bells of London ringing, and in their chiming, he seemed to hear a message meant specifically for him: "Turn again, Whittington, Lord Mayor of London." Whether this was divine intervention, wishful thinking, or simply the product of an exhausted and discouraged mind, the message filled Dick with renewed hope and determination. He turned back toward the city, resolved to continue his efforts and trust that Providence would eventually reward his perseverance. Dick's return to the Fitzwarren household coincided with the arrival of the merchant vessel carrying news of the cat's spectacular success. The wealth generated by the sale transformed Dick from a poor scullery boy into one of the richest young men in London, a change in fortune so dramatic that it seemed almost magical to those who witnessed it. With his newfound wealth, Dick could have retired to a life of ease and luxury, but instead, he chose to use his fortune as the foundation for a career in trade and commerce. He studied the merchant's art under Master Fitzwarren's guidance, learning the complexities of international trade, the art of negotiation, and the importance of maintaining reputation and integrity in all business dealings. Dick's success in business was matched by his generosity to those less fortunate than himself. He never forgot his own humble origins or the kindness shown to him during his darkest hours. As his wealth and influence grew, so did his charitable activities, earning him the respect and admiration of both the common people and the merchant class. The prophecy heard in the church bells proved accurate in ways that even Dick could hardly have imagined. His combination of business acumen, personal integrity, and charitable disposition made him a natural leader within London's merchant community. When the time came to select a new Lord Mayor, Dick Whittington was the unanimous choice of his fellow citizens. Dick's tenure as Lord Mayor was marked by significant improvements to the city's infrastructure, the establishment of charitable institutions that would benefit the poor for generations to come, and the strengthening of London's position as a centre of international trade. He served multiple terms in the office, each one adding to his reputation as one of the greatest leaders in the city's history. The wise men of Gotham, Folly and Wisdom. In the heart of Nottinghamshire, not far from the forest haunts of Robin Hood, lies the village of Gotham, whose inhabitants have achieved a curious sort of immortality through their reputation for foolishness. Yet the tales of the wise men of Gotham reveal a different kind of wisdom, one that recognizes the sometimes thin line between apparent folly and profound insight, between simple-mindedness and sophisticated understanding of human nature. The origins of Gotham's reputation for foolishness trace back to a confrontation with royal authority that required the villagers to demonstrate considerable cunning while appearing to be harmlessly simple. When King John announced his intention to establish a royal palace near Gotham, the villagers realized that such an honor would bring with it crushing taxation, forced labor, and the loss of their traditional way of life. Unable to oppose the king's will directly without risking severe punishment, the villagers conceived a plan that would make their community appear unsuitable for royal residence. They decided to act as if they were all completely mad, hoping that the king's representatives would report back that Gotham was populated by harmless lunatics, unworthy of royal attention. The performance the villagers put on for the king's scouts demonstrated remarkable coordination and creativity. Some were found trying to drown an eel in a pond, others attempting to build a fence around a cuckoo to keep it singing in their village year-round. A group of men was discovered trying to rake the moon's reflection out of a pond, while another contingent worked diligently to carry sunlight into a windowless building using buckets and baskets. Each of these apparently foolish activities had its own internal logic that revealed the villagers' actual intelligence while maintaining the facade of simple-mindedness. The attempt to drown the eel parodied the absurdity of trying to kill something that lives in water, while the effort to cage the cuckoo mocked the impossibility of controlling natural forces. The moon-raking expedition demonstrated understanding of reflection and light, while appearing to show ignorance of basic physics. The king's representatives, thoroughly convinced that Gotham was inhabited by harmless madmen, reported back that the village was unsuitable for any royal purpose. The ruse succeeded completely, and King John chose another location for his palace, leaving the villagers free to continue their traditional way of life without interference from royal authority. However, the reputation for foolishness that saved Gotham from unwanted royal attention became permanently attached to the village, generating numerous additional tales that explored the complex relationship between wisdom and folly. These stories often featured villagers whose apparently simple-minded actions revealed deeper truths about human nature and social relations. One of the most famous Gotham tales involves the villagers' attempt to determine the depth of a pond by joining hands and wading in together. When the man in the center disappeared beneath the water, the others concluded that the pond was 1 man deep, a measurement that, while unconventional, actually provided useful information about the pond's characteristics relative to human scale. Another story tells of Gotham men who tried to wall in a cuckoo to ensure it would stay in their village year-round. When the bird flew away, they concluded that they should have built the wall higher, failing to understand that the real issue was their attempt to control something that was inherently free. Yet this apparent foolishness contained a profound commentary on the futility of trying to possess or control natural beauty. The tale of the Gotham men who tried to carry sunlight into a windowless building using buckets and baskets appears to demonstrate complete ignorance of the nature of light. However, their persistent efforts to solve the problem of darkness through practical action, however misguided, revealed an admirable determination to improve their circumstances rather than simply accepting them as unchangeable. Perhaps the most sophisticated of the Gotham stories involves the villagers' attempt to prevent their pond from being polluted by moonbeams. Believing that the moon's reflection would contaminate their water supply, they spent an entire night trying to rake it out with garden tools. Their failure to remove the reflection led them to conclude that moonbeams were more persistent than they had expected, but their concern for water purity demonstrated genuine environmental awareness. The wisdom hidden within these tales of apparent folly lies in their recognition that different kinds of intelligence serve different purposes. The villagers of Gotham possessed the practical wisdom necessary to outwit royal authority and protect their community, but they also understood the value of appearing harmless and non-threatening to those in power. Moreover, the Gotham stories reveal an understanding that excessive cleverness can sometimes be less effective than straightforward simplicity. The villagers' apparently foolish approaches to problems often contained insights that more sophisticated methods might miss, suggesting that there are multiple ways of understanding and interacting with the world. The enduring appeal of the Gotham tales lies in their gentle mockery of pretension and their celebration of common sense, even when that common sense manifests in apparently uncommon ways. The villagers' willingness to appear foolish in order to achieve their goals demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of social dynamics that belied their reputation for simple-mindedness. Simple Simon and the world of children's wisdom. Among the characters who populate English folklore, few have maintained such enduring appeal across generations as Simple Simon, the naive protagonist, whose encounters with the wider world provide both entertainment and subtle moral instruction. Simon's adventures, typically told in verse form, capture the perspective of innocent childhood confronting the complexities and contradictions of adult society. Simple Simon's defining characteristic is his literal mindedness, his tendency to interpret instructions and situations in the most straightforward possible manner without considering context or conventional understanding. This quality, while often leading to comic situations, also serves to highlight the arbitrary nature of many social conventions and the gap between theoretical knowledge and practical wisdom. The most famous of Simon's adventures involves his encounter with a pieman at a fair, where his request for a taste of the wares before purchase seems reasonable from a child's perspective, but violates the merchant's business model. Simon's surprise at being refused this seemingly modest request reveals his innocence regarding commercial transactions, while also questioning the logic of expecting customers to buy goods sight unseen. When the pieman suggests that Simon should show his money first, the boy's honest response that he has none exposes the fundamental contradiction in a system that requires payment for necessities. Simon's directness cuts through the polite fictions that normally surround economic transactions, revealing their essentially coercive nature when viewed from the perspective of those who lack resources. Simon's fishing expedition in his mother's pail demonstrates another aspect of his character, the willingness to attempt practical solutions without fully understanding the requirements for success. His failure to catch any fish teaches him about the importance of proper equipment and technique, but his persistence in trying reveals an admirable refusal to be deterred by initial failure. The episode in which Simon attempts to catch a whale in his mother's pail expands the fishing theme to absurd proportions, highlighting the gap between ambition and capability that characterizes much human endeavor. Simon's confidence that he can accomplish this impossible task reflects the boundless optimism of childhood, while his inevitable failure provides a gentle lesson in the importance of matching goals to available resources. Simple Simon's encounter with a fair maid who invites him to join her in collecting water illustrates his trusting nature and his vulnerability to those who might take advantage of his innocence. The maid's subsequent disappointment with Simon's performance reveals the cruel reality that good intentions are not always sufficient to meet others' expectations. The moral dimension of Simple Simon's adventures becomes apparent in stories that involve his interaction with authority figures. When confronted by officials who demand explanations for his unconventional behavior, Simon's honest responses often expose the arbitrary nature of rules and regulations that adults take for granted. Simon's attempt to buy a pennyworth of bread with a penny's worth of cheese demonstrates his understanding of equivalent exchange while revealing his ignorance of conventional monetary systems. His logic that goods of equal value should be freely exchangeable makes perfect sense from a child's perspective, but conflicts with the complex economic relationships that govern adult transactions. The educational value of Simple Simon's adventures lies not in their explicit moral instruction, but in their gentle exploration of the gap between ideal and reality, between childish innocence and worldly wisdom. Simon's failures often result from his adherence to principles of honesty, generosity, and straightforwardness that adults claim to value but frequently abandon in practice. Through Simon's eyes, readers see the adult world as it appears to those not yet fully socialized into its conventions and compromises. His questions and assumptions reveal the arbitrary nature of many rules and customs that adults follow without questioning, while his mistakes demonstrate the practical importance of understanding social expectations, even when they seem illogical. The enduring appeal of Simple Simon lies in his representation of the part of human nature that remains childlike regardless of age, the aspect of personality that continues to question, wonder, and hope despite accumulated experience of disappointment and compromise. His adventures remind readers of the value of maintaining innocence and curiosity, even in a world that often seems to punish both qualities. In the reign of King Richard the Lionheart, when that monarch's attention was focused more upon the Holy Land than upon his English subjects, the Shire of Nottingham groaned under the oppression of corrupt officials who used the king's absence to enrich themselves at the expense of the common people. It was into this atmosphere of injustice and exploitation that stepped a figure who would become the most celebrated outlaw in English folklore, a man known to history as Robin Hood. The origins of Robin Hood remain shrouded in the mists of legend, with different tales offering varying accounts of his background. Some claim he was Robert of Locksley, a young nobleman dispossessed of his lands through the machinations of corrupt officials. Others suggest he was simply a yeoman farmer driven to outlawry by circumstances beyond his control. What remains consistent across all versions of his story is the transformation of an ordinary man into an extraordinary symbol of resistance against tyranny. The Sherwood Forest of Robin's time was a vast wilderness that stretched across much of Nottinghamshire, a realm unto itself, where the king's law held little sway and ancient customs still governed the relationship between man and nature. Within this green sanctuary, Robin established his band of followers, men who had been pushed beyond the bounds of legal society by the very corruption and injustice they now fought against. Unlike the random brigandage that characterized most outlaw bands of the period, Robin's organization operated according to a strict moral code. They would rob from those who had gained their wealth through oppression or corruption, but they treated poor travelers with courtesy and often provided them with assistance. This selectivity in their targets earned them the grudging respect of the common people, who saw in Robin's band a force for justice that the official authorities had failed to provide. The leader of this band was a man of remarkable abilities, equally skilled with bow and sword, possessed of a keen intelligence that allowed him to outwit his enemies time and again. Robin's archery in particular became legendary throughout the land. It was said he could split a willow wand at 100 paces, thread an arrow through a ring barely wider than the shaft itself, and strike targets that other men could barely see. But Robin's greatest weapon was not his bow or his blade, but his understanding of human nature and his ability to inspire others to fight for something greater than themselves. The men who gathered around him in Sherwood Forest came from all walks of life, united not by birth or station, but by their shared commitment to justice and their loyalty to their extraordinary leader. The Merry Men's Fellowship. The band of outlaws that assembled under Robin Hood's leadership became known throughout England as the Merry Men, a title that reflected not only their generally cheerful disposition, but also their remarkable ability to find joy and fellowship even in the harsh conditions of forest life. Each member of this band brought unique skills and personality traits that contributed to the group's success and cohesion. Little John stood as Robin's most trusted lieutenant, a giant of a man whose staff work was as legendary as Robin's archery. Despite his intimidating physical presence, Little John possessed a gentle nature and a dry sense of humor that endeared him to his companions. His first encounter with Robin, a staff battle on a narrow bridge that ended with Robin taking an unexpected bath in the stream below, established the pattern of their relationship, one based on mutual respect, friendly competition, and unwavering loyalty. Will Scarlet brought passion and intensity to the band's activities, impetuous, where Robin was calculating, quick to anger where Little John was patient. Will nonetheless proved himself invaluable in situations requiring bold action and fierce determination. His skill with the sword complemented the other weapons' expertise within the group, ensuring that the Merry Men could handle any combat situation that arose. Friar Tuck represented the spiritual dimension of the outlaw band, a man of God who had found his calling not in the comfortable confines of a monastery, but in the rough justice of Sherwood Forest. His presence legitimized the band's activities in the eyes of many, for here was a holy man who had chosen to stand with the oppressed against their oppressors. Tuck's massive frame and formidable quarterstaff skills proved that he was as capable in physical confrontations as he was in matters of the soul. Alan Dale brought music and culture to the Forest Brotherhood. His mastery of various instruments, particularly the harp and lute, provided entertainment during the long winter evenings when the band gathered around their fires. More importantly, Alan served as the group's chronicler and messenger, his minstrel's persona, allowing him to travel freely throughout the countryside, gathering information and spreading carefully crafted versions of the band's exploits. Much the miller's son represented the common folk from whom Robin drew much of his support. Neither noble-born nor particularly educated, Much possessed the practical wisdom that comes from hard work and honest living. His loyalty to Robin was absolute, dating from the day the outlaw leader had saved him from unjust punishment at the hands of corrupt officials. The diversity of the Merry Men's backgrounds reflected Robin's philosophy that worth was determined by character rather than birth. Former knights rode alongside peasant farmers, learned clerks, shared campfires with simple woodsmen, and all were treated as equals within the forest community. This egalitarian approach was revolutionary for its time, challenging the rigid social hierarchies that governed medieval society. Life in Sherwood Forest, while dangerous and often uncomfortable, fostered a sense of brotherhood that many of the outlaws had never experienced in conventional society. They shared everything equally, from the proceeds of their adventures to the risks inherent in their chosen lifestyle. This communal approach created bonds stronger than family ties, forged in the crucible of shared hardship and common purpose. The sheriff's nemesis. No figure in the Robin Hood legends embodies corrupt authority more completely than the Sheriff of Nottingham, a man whose name became synonymous with the abuse of power and the oppression of the innocent. Historical records suggest that the position of sheriff in medieval England was indeed prone to corruption, as these officials wielded considerable power with relatively little oversight, particularly during the king's frequent absences. The sheriff in Robin's story represents everything the outlaw leader fought against. Where Robin championed justice, the sheriff pursued personal gain. Where Robin showed mercy to the weak, the sheriff exploited their vulnerability. Where Robin inspired loyalty through example, the sheriff commanded obedience through fear. This fundamental opposition created a conflict that went far beyond simple law enforcement, becoming instead a battle between two incompatible visions of how society should function. The sheriff's attempts to capture Robin Hood provided the framework for countless adventures, each one demonstrating the outlaw's superior wit and moral authority. These encounters often took the form of elaborate schemes, with the sheriff attempting to use Robin's own principles against him, only to find himself outmaneuvered and humiliated by his quarry's superior understanding of human nature. One of the most famous of these encounters involved the sheriff's announcement of an archery contest, with a golden arrow as the prize. Recognizing this as an obvious trap, Robin nevertheless could not resist the challenge to his reputation as England's greatest archer. Disguising himself as a poor tinker, he entered the competition and handily won the prize, shooting with such accuracy that even his enemies were forced to acknowledge his skill. The sheriff's fury at being outwitted in front of his own men led to increasingly desperate measures. He attempted to use Robin's friends and family as bait, kidnapped innocent people in hopes of drawing the outlaw into the open, and even allied himself with genuinely evil individuals whose methods made his own corruption seem mild by comparison. Yet each scheme failed, often spectacularly, leaving the sheriff's reputation in tatters, while Robin's legend grew ever brighter. The psychological dimension of their conflict was as important as the physical one. The sheriff represented the established order's fear of change, its terror that the common people might realize their own power and demand justice. Robin embodied the revolutionary idea that authority must be earned through virtue rather than simply inherited or purchased, a concept that threatened the very foundations of medieval hierarchy. The romance of Marian. Among the many elements that elevated the Robin Hood legend beyond simple tales of outlawry was the introduction of Maid Marian, a figure who brought both romantic interest and additional moral complexity to the stories. Marian's character evolved significantly over the centuries of storytelling, but in most versions, she represents the ideal of noble womanhood, while possessing the independence and strength to be Robin's true partner, rather than merely his prize. In some tellings, Marian begins as a lady of noble birth, perhaps the ward of a corrupt official, or the daughter of a family loyal to the king. Her first encounter with Robin often involves her being rescued from some form of injustice or oppression, but unlike the passive damsels common in medieval romance, Marian quickly proves herself capable of both independent thought and decisive action. The development of the romance between Robin and Marian served multiple narrative purposes. On one level, it provided the emotional depth that transformed Robin from a simple folk hero into a more complex character capable of love, jealousy, and sacrifice. Their relationship also demonstrated that the ideals Robin fought for extended beyond mere redistribution of wealth to encompass respect for individual dignity and the right of all people, regardless of gender, to choose their own destiny. Merian's integration into the outlaw band brought new dynamics to the Forest Fellowship. Her presence civilized some of the rougher aspects of outlaw life, while simultaneously proving that dedication to justice was not limited by conventional gender roles. In many versions of the legend, she becomes as skilled an archer as any of the merry men, as comfortable wielding a sword as she is with more traditionally feminine accomplishments. The couple's courtship unfolded against the backdrop of their shared commitment to fighting injustice. Their love was tested not only by the dangers inherent in outlaw life, but also by the moral complexities of their situation. Marian's noble birth often created conflicts between her loyalty to Robin and her obligations to family or social position, while Robin's dedication to his followers sometimes required him to place their welfare above his personal happiness. The wedding of Robin and Marian, when it finally occurred, became a celebration not just of their personal love, but of the community they had built together. The ceremony itself, often conducted by Friar Tuck in some hidden grove within Sherwood Forest, symbolized the creation of a new kind of society based on chosen bonds rather than inherited obligations. The return of the king. The concluding chapters of the Robin Hood legend often center around the return of King Richard from the Crusades and the resolution of the conflicts that had driven Robin to outlawry in the first place. This narrative element served to reconcile the outlaw's defiance of authority with the medieval reverence for legitimate kingship, suggesting that Robin's actions were justified not by opposition to royal authority itself, but by resistance to its corrupt representation. King Richard's character in these stories embodies the ideal of just rulership, a monarch who places the welfare of his subjects above his personal interests, and who recognizes merit regardless of social station. When he finally learns of the situation in his English domains, his response demonstrates the kind of leadership that makes outlawry unnecessary. The king's first encounter with Robin often involves some form of deception or test, with Richard disguising himself as a simple knight or merchant to observe the outlaw's behavior firsthand. These encounters typically result in the king being impressed not only by Robin's skill and courage, but also by his adherence to principles of justice and his genuine concern for the common people. The revelation of Richard's true identity creates a moment of dramatic tension in which Robin must choose between his hard-won independence and his fundamental loyalty to legitimate authority. This choice reflects the complex relationship between individual conscience and social obligation that runs throughout the Robin Hood legends. Richard's pardon of Robin and the merry men represents more than simple royal mercy. It acknowledges the validity of their cause and the necessity of their actions. By welcoming the outlaws back into legal society and often granting Robin some official position, the king validates the principle that authority must be earned through virtue rather than simply inherited or assumed. However, many versions of the legend suggest that Robin's return to conventional society is not entirely successful. The compromises required by official position, the restrictions imposed by legal methods, and the corrupt influence of court politics often prove incompatible with the principles that had guided the outlaw band. This tension between idealistic goals and practical limitations reflects the enduring challenge of maintaining moral integrity within imperfect institutions. The death of Robin Hood, when it comes, typically occurs not in glorious battle, but through treachery or the slow corruption of age and compromise. Some versions tell of his final visit to Kirklees Priory, where he seeks healing from his cousin, the prioress, only to be betrayed and slowly bled to death. With his last strength, he draws his bow one final time, asking that he be buried wherever the arrow falls, thus ensuring that even his grave becomes part of the forest he loved. Long before the Romans set foot upon British shores, the Celtic peoples of these islands possessed a rich tradition of storytelling that wove together mythology, history, and spiritual wisdom into narratives of extraordinary power and beauty. Among the greatest treasures of this tradition are the tales collected in the Mabinogi, 4 interconnected stories that reveal the complex cosmology and profound insights of ancient Welsh culture. The first branch tells the story of Pwyll, Prince of Dyfed, whose encounter with Arawn, king of the otherworld, sets in motion a series of events that demonstrates the fluid boundaries between the world of mortals and the realm of the spirits. Pwyll's willingness to exchange places with Arawn for a year and a day, ruling the otherworld, while the supernatural king governs Dyfed, establishes themes of honor, sacrifice, and the testing of character that permeate Celtic literature. During his sojourn in the otherworld, Paul faces challenges that test not his martial prowess, but his moral integrity. When called upon to share Arawn's bed and wife, Paul maintains perfect chastity, placing honor above desire and earning the eternal friendship of the otherworld king. This demonstration of character wins him the title Paul Pen and Worth, Paul Head of the Otherworld, and establishes him as a figure capable of bridging the gap between mortal and immortal realms. The consequences of Pwyll's otherworldly adventure continue to unfold when he encounters Rhiannon, a mysterious woman mounted upon a white horse that no earthly steed can overtake. Rhiannon's supernatural nature becomes apparent through her ability to travel at impossible speeds while appearing to move slowly, a paradox that reflects the different laws governing the realm from which she comes. The courtship between Paul and Rhiannon unfolds according to ancient protocols that recognize the power and autonomy of the feminine divine. Rhiannon chooses Paul as her consort, but their union must be properly negotiated and cannot be achieved through force or trickery. When Paul's clumsiness nearly loses him his bride to another suitor, only Rhiannon's own cleverness and determination secure their eventual marriage. The second branch continues the saga through the story of Branwen, daughter of Lir, whose marriage to the Irish king Matholsh was intended to unite the two islands in peace. Instead, the insult offered to Branwen by her husband leads to a war that devastates both nations and introduces one of the most powerful symbols in Celtic mythology, the Cauldron of Rebirth. This magical vessel, given to Matholsh as part of Branwen's dowry, possesses the power to restore slain warriors to life, though they return mute and without the spark of true vitality. The cauldron represents the complex Celtic understanding of death and rebirth, suggesting that while life can be restored, something essential is always lost in the process. The war between Britain and Ireland reaches its climax in a battle so devastating that only 7 men survive from the British forces, while the Irish are virtually annihilated. The head of Bran the Blessed, mortally wounded by a poisoned spear, continues to speak and provide counsel to the survivors, directing them to bury it beneath the White Hill in London as a protection against invasion from across the sea. The third branch shifts focus to Manawydan, son of Lir, who inherits the devastated realm of Dyfed after the catastrophic war, when a mysterious enchantment falls upon the land, rendering it empty of all human and animal life save for Manawydan and his companions. The story explores themes of perseverance, wisdom, and the power of patient observation to overcome supernatural obstacles. The enchantment that afflicts Dyfed reflects the Celtic understanding of the land as a living entity whose health is intimately connected to the moral and spiritual state of its inhabitants. The curse can only be broken through a combination of cunning, moral integrity, and the willingness to face supernatural forces without losing one's essential humanity. The fourth branch brings the cycle to a close with the story of Math, son of Mathanwe, and the creation of Blodowed, a woman formed from flowers by the magicians Math and Gwydion to serve as a bride for Lulo gifts. This tale explores the consequences of attempting to circumvent natural law through magical means, and the tragic results that follow when beings are created for purposes that deny their essential nature. Blodowed's transformation from dutiful wife to adulteress and would-be murderer reflects the Celtic understanding that attempts to constrain or control the feminine principle inevitably lead to destruction. Her eventual transformation into an owl serves as both punishment and liberation, allowing her to find her true nature in the wild freedom of the night sky. The Ulster Cycle, Heroes of Ancient Ireland. Across the Irish Sea, the tradition of Celtic storytelling reached perhaps its greatest expression in the Ulster Cycle, a collection of heroic tales centered around the court of King Conchobar mac Nessa at Main Matcha and the exploits of the greatest hero in Irish literature, Cuchulainn, the Hound of Ulster. The Ulster Cycle presents a world where the boundaries between history and mythology blur beyond recognition, where mortal warriors possess superhuman abilities and where the intervention of gods and goddesses in human affairs is commonplace. At the center of this world stands Cuchulainn, originally named Setanta, whose transformation into Ireland's greatest hero begins with an act of youthful impulsiveness that demonstrates both his potential and his essential character. As a young boy visiting the court of Culann the Smith, Setanta arrives late to find the great hound that guards the compound already released for the night. When the beast attacks, the boy kills it with his bare hands, demonstrating the supernatural strength that would make him famous throughout the known world. His offer to serve as Culann's guard until a replacement hound can be found earns him the name Cuchulainn, the Hound of Culann, and establishes the pattern of responsibility and honor that would govern his entire life. The defining characteristic of Cuchulainn as a hero is his Rheastrad or warp spasm, a battle fury that transforms him into something barely recognizable as human. When this battle madness comes upon him, one eye retreats so far into his head that a crane could not reach it, while the other bulges out to the size of a cauldron. His mouth stretches to his ears, foam flecks his lips, and his hair stands on end, each strand tipped with blood or sparks. In this state, he becomes virtually invincible, but the transformation exacts a terrible price, leaving him exhausted and vulnerable once the fury passes. The greatest test of Cuchulainn's heroism comes during the cattle raid of Cooley, when Queen Medb of Connacht invades Ulster to steal the brown bull of Cooley, a magical creature whose possession would make her equal in wealth to her husband. The timing of the invasion coincides with the Ulster men's affliction with the pangs of birth, a curse that leaves them helpless for several days. Only Cuchulainn, being young and not yet subject to the curse, stands between the invading army and the defenseless kingdom. What follows is an epic single combat that lasts for months, with Cuchulainn challenging and defeating champion after champion from Medb's army. Each day brings a new warrior eager to win fame by killing Ulster's defender, and each day that warrior joins the growing list of those who have fallen to the hound's prowess. The psychological dimension of Cuchulainn's struggle becomes as important as the physical one. Fighting alone against overwhelming odds, watching friends and allies fall victim to his enemies' strategies, bearing the entire weight of his people's survival on his shoulders, the young hero experiences the profound isolation that comes with extraordinary responsibility. The climax of the cattle raid comes with the arrival of Ferdiad, Cuchulainn's foster brother and dearest friend, whom Queen Medb has bribed and threatened into taking the field against Ulster's champion. The combat between these two warriors, trained by the same masters and bound by bonds stronger than blood, represents one of the most tragic episodes in all of Celtic literature. For 3 days, the foster brothers fight with increasing desperation, each knowing that only one can survive, yet neither willing to yield. Their combat follows ancient protocols, with different weapons chosen for each day and periods of rest when they tend each other's wounds and share food like the brothers they truly are. On the final day, Cuchulainn resorts to the gay Bulga, a terrible spear taught to him alone by the warrior woman Scathach, and kills Ferdiad with a weapon against which there is no defense. The death of Ferdiad marks the beginning of Cuchulainn's spiritual decline. Though he continues to defend Ulster with undiminished skill, the joy has gone out of battle for him. He has learned that heroism sometimes requires the sacrifice of everything one holds dear, and this knowledge weighs upon him like a physical burden. The Ulster cycle does not end with triumph, but with the inevitable tragedy that awaits all heroes who exceed the normal bounds of human achievement. Cuchulainn's death comes through a combination of supernatural manipulation and his own unwillingness to compromise the principles that have guided his life. Bound by sacred obligations to respond to requests for aid, he is tricked into situations that drain his strength and leave him vulnerable to his enemies. Even in death, Cuchulainn maintains his defiant spirit. Mortally wounded, he binds himself to a standing stone so that he may die on his feet, facing his enemies. So terrible is his reputation that none dare approach, until a raven lands upon his shoulder, signaling that the great hero has finally fallen. Yet even then, when an enemy moves to take his head as a trophy, Cuchulainn's sword hand closes one final time, severing the would-be desecrator's arm, and proving that the Hound of Ulster is formidable even in death. The Finian cycle, Finn, and the Fina, the third great cycle of Irish heroic literature, focuses on Finn mac Cumhal and his band of warriors known as the Fianna professional soldiers, who served the High King of Ireland during the summer months and lived by hunting during the winter. Unlike the Ulster cycle's focus on a single great hero, the Fenian tales celebrate the collective adventures of a brotherhood united by shared values of courage, loyalty, and justice. Finn mac Cumhal emerges as a very different type of hero from Cuchulainn, possessing not only physical prowess, but also supernatural wisdom gained through his consumption of the salmon of knowledge. As a young man, studying with the druid Finnegas, Finn was tasked with cooking this magical fish but forbidden to taste it. When he burned his thumb on the salmon's skin and instinctively put it in his mouth to ease the pain, he gained access to divine knowledge that would guide him throughout his career. The thumb of knowledge became Finn's most distinctive attribute, allowing him to gain insight into any situation simply by placing it in his mouth. This supernatural wisdom, combined with his natural intelligence and leadership abilities, made him the ideal commander for the Fianna, a force that required not just warriors but thinkers capable of dealing with the complex challenges that faced ancient Ireland. The Fianna themselves were bound by strict codes of honor and conduct that elevated them above mere mercenaries. No man could join their ranks without proving his worth through rigorous tests of courage, skill, and character. He must be able to defend himself while standing waist-deep in a hole, armed only with a shield and hazel stick, against 9 warriors hurling spears at him. He must be able to run through the woods at full speed without breaking a single twig, without braiding his hair coming loose, and without being overtaken by his pursuers. Beyond these physical requirements, each potential member of the Fianna must also demonstrate poetic ability, for these warriors were expected to be cultured men capable of contributing to the intellectual and artistic life of their society. The combination of martial prowess and cultural sophistication created a warrior elite unlike any other in European literature. The adventures of the Fianna took them throughout Ireland and beyond, battling supernatural foes, exploring otherworldly realms, and serving as champions of justice throughout the known world. Their exploits demonstrate the Celtic understanding of heroism as something that transcends mere physical courage to encompass wisdom, compassion, and dedication to the greater good. One of the most celebrated of these adventures involves the pursuit of Diarmuid and Grain, a tale that explores the conflict between personal desire and social obligation. When Grain, betrothed to the aging Finn, falls in love with the young warrior Diarmuid, she places him under a geas, a magical compulsion that forces him to elope with her despite his loyalty to his commander. The pursuit that follows lasts for years, with Finn using all his resources and supernatural knowledge to track the fleeing lovers while they survive through Diarmuid's skill and the aid of various supernatural allies. The tale becomes a meditation on the nature of love, duty, and forgiveness, as Finn struggles with his desire for revenge and his genuine affection for both the woman who betrayed him and the warrior whose only crime was being unable to resist a magical compulsion. The resolution of the pursuit, when it finally comes, demonstrates both the nobility and the tragic limitations of the heroic code. Finn's eventual reconciliation with the lovers seems complete, but when Diarmuid is mortally wounded by an enchanted boar, Finn's hesitation to use his healing powers reveals that some wounds go too deep for even the greatest heroes to overcome entirely. The decline and fall of the Fianna provides the cycle with its tragic conclusion, as internal divisions and conflicts with the regular army of Ireland lead to the destruction of this heroic brotherhood. The Battle of Gavra sees the virtual annihilation of the Fianna, with only a handful of survivors left to carry on their traditions and remember their glorious past. The otherworld, Sidhe and fairy folk. Throughout Celtic literature, the boundary between the mortal world and the realm of the spirits remains permeable, with frequent traffic between the two domains. The otherworld of Celtic tradition is not a distant heaven or hell, but a parallel reality that exists alongside our own, accessible through sacred sites, certain times of the year, or the invitation of its supernatural inhabitants. The Tuatha De Danann, the divine race that ruled Ireland before the coming of mortal men, retreated into the otherworld, rather than leaving entirely. From their hidden realms beneath hills and lakes, they continue to influence human affairs, sometimes as allies, sometimes as adversaries, but always as beings of immense power, whose motivations often remain mysterious to mortal understanding. The Cid here, as these other-worldly beings came to be known, possess abilities that transcend natural law. They can alter their appearance, at will, travel vast distances in the blink of an eye, and manipulate time, so that what seems like a day in their realm might encompass years in the mortal world. Their technology, if it can be called that, operates according to principles that appear magical to human observers, but follow their own consistent laws within the otherworldly context. Encounters between mortals and the Cid often involve tests of character, with the supernatural beings evaluating human worth according to criteria that may seem arbitrary but actually reflect profound spiritual principles. Generosity, courage, and respect for the natural world earn their favor, while greed, cowardice, and disregard for ancient customs invoke their wrath. The fairy hills, or Cid, that dot the Irish landscape serve as gateways between the worlds, becoming especially active during the great festivals of Samhain, Imbolc, Beltane, and Lugnasad. During these times, the barriers between realms weaken, allowing for easier passage in both directions and creating opportunities for adventures that would be impossible at other times of the year. Musicians and poets enjoy a special relationship with the other world. For the Cid, he appreciate artistic excellence and often reward truly gifted performers with supernatural enhancement of their abilities. However, this gift comes with obligations, as those who receive otherworldly inspiration must use their talents in service of truth and beauty, rather than mere personal advancement. The concept of the geas, or magical prohibition, reflects the Celtic understanding that supernatural power always comes with corresponding responsibilities. These mystical taboos, whether inherited, imposed, or voluntarily accepted, create the dramatic tension that drives many of the greatest Celtic stories. The hero's greatness often depends upon his adherence to seemingly arbitrary restrictions, while his downfall typically results from circumstances that force him to violate these sacred obligations. Time operates differently within the other world, creating narrative possibilities that transcend the limitations of normal chronology. Heroes may spend what seems like hours in fairy halls, only to discover that years have passed in the mortal world, or conversely, they may experience decades of otherworldly adventure, while only moments elapse in ordinary time. This temporal flexibility allows Celtic storytellers to explore themes of mortality, memory, and the relationship between experience and duration. The landscape of the other world reflects the Celtic reverence for the natural world, appearing as an idealized version of Ireland, where every hill is perfectly formed, every stream runs crystal clear, and every tree bears fruit regardless of season. Yet this perfection comes with its own dangers, for the unchanging nature of the otherworldly realm can trap mortal visitors who lose their connection to the cycle of growth, decay, and renewal that characterizes normal existence. Merlin, the archetypal wizard. Among all the figures who emerge from Celtic literature to capture the imagination of later ages, none has proven more enduring or influential than Merlin, the archetypal wizard, whose wisdom and power span the transition from the ancient world to the medieval period. Known by various names throughout the Celtic tradition, Myrddin in Welsh, Merlinus in Latin texts, this figure embodies the synthesis of Druidic wisdom, Christian mysticism, and primordial magic that characterizes the spiritual landscape of early Britain. The origins of Merlin reach back into the mists of prehistoric times, when the Druids served as the bridge between the human community and the forces that governed the natural world. Unlike the ceremonial priests of Mediterranean civilizations, the Druids were practical magicians whose knowledge encompassed astronomy, medicine, law, and the manipulation of supernatural forces for the benefit of their people. In the earliest Welsh traditions, Myrddin appears as a wild man of the woods, driven to madness by the horror of a great battle in which his supernatural sight allowed him to perceive not only the physical carnage, but also the spiritual devastation wrought by warfare. This trauma transforms him from a court bard into a prophetic hermit whose utterances, though often cryptic, reveal profound truths about the nature of time, destiny, and the cyclical patterns that govern human history. The transformation of this tragic figure into the wise counselor of Arthurian legend reflects the complex process by which Celtic traditions were adapted to medieval sensibilities. The Merlin who guides Arthur's rise to power retains the supernatural knowledge and prophetic abilities of his predecessor while gaining a more sophisticated understanding of political realities and human psychology. Merlin's magic operates according to principles that blend naturalistic observation with genuine supernatural power. His ability to assume different shapes reflects the druidic understanding of the fundamental unity underlying apparent diversity, while his prophetic visions demonstrate mastery of the temporal dimensions that normally constrain human perception. Unlike the flashy conjuring tricks associated with stage magicians, Merlin's abilities serve practical purposes and operate in harmony with cosmic law, rather than in defiance of it. The relationship between Merlin and Arthur exemplifies the Celtic ideal of the partnership between wisdom and power, spiritual authority, and temporal leadership. Merlin's role is not to rule directly, but to ensure that those who do rule possess the knowledge and moral foundation necessary for just governance. His guidance shapes Arthur into the kind of king whose reign benefits not only his immediate subjects, but all who come within his sphere of influence. The tragedy of Merlin's story lies in his awareness of his own eventual downfall, knowledge gained through the same prophetic abilities that make him valuable as a counselor. His love for Nimue, whether she is portrayed as student, lover, or enemy, leads inevitably to his imprisonment beneath a great stone or within an enchanted tower, depending upon the version of the tale. This imprisonment represents not simple defeat, but rather the withdrawal of ancient wisdom from a world that has lost the capacity to appreciate its value. Yet Merlin's imprisonment is not permanent, for like Arthur himself, the great wizard waits for the time when his wisdom will once again be needed. Various traditions suggest that he continues to influence events from his mystical prison, or that he will emerge when Britain faces its greatest peril. This cyclical understanding of history, in which the past remains alive and potentially active within the present, reflects the distinctively Celtic approach to time and causation. The legacy of Merlin extends far beyond literature into the realm of psychological and spiritual symbolism. He represents the aspect of human consciousness that seeks to understand the deeper patterns underlying surface appearances, the part of the mind that recognizes connections invisible to ordinary perception. In this sense, every person who has ever sought wisdom beyond the merely practical, who has ever glimpsed the magical possibilities hidden within everyday existence, participates in the continuing story of Merlin.